Brilliant. So, Dr. J, first of all, thank you so much for showing up on time for this morning chat. I I started doing something different. Rather than me introducing someone or saying words on behalf of somebody else, I don't know you as well as you do. So I'd rather you kind of give me whatever, call it the elevator pitch or just what's going on, who you are and how you spend your time. Just gonna give us just a little bit of a flavor of who you are as a human being or a human doing.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think it's always good to get to know a little bit about somebody first, especially from their mouth, like
Mm,
you said. So I think probably the most important things about me is I tend to straddle the line of many worlds. Like yourself,
mm,
I like to converse with people. I like
yeah.
to understand their lived experience, how it relates to where, I find them that day, and just kind of learn and I take those experiences and really enjoy them. And so I kind of call myself a story collector. I love to
Oh,
go around and listen to people's stories, listen to, what drives them, what motivates them, what makes them sad, what makes them angry, and trying to figure out how all this works together to create the society that we live in today. So I think that's something that is of interest to me, and really it serves my bigger goal, which is to just make the world a better place to the best I can. And that involves doing really just a lot of different things, because you can make the world a better place in so many different ways. So for example, I like to get out into nature and enjoy nature in a way that's very spiritual to me. And I feel
mhm.
that it grounds me with the earth, it grounds me with other people that appreciate things like nature. And it's almost an empathetic exercise,
Mhm.
I feel, going into nature and really just enjoying it, being mindful, being present. Um, Otherwise, I like to get out and do stuff. I'm active. I like to travel. I've been all over the world traveling since I was a kid. My dad was a military, um, was in the Air Force, and so we traveled quite a bit, and that just really set in my heart all the amazing things that you can learn and do when you travel. And so that's a huge part of my life and something I teach my kids who are 10, 9, and 6, that the world is something to learn from and people are something to learn from, not to judge, but to show up with curiosity and authentic curiosity of what their lived experience actually is. And, we do other things together, hiking, snowboarding. We like to go to the lakes and rivers and things like that. So really, I don't know. I like to bridge both worlds and like science and doing reading up on stress and how things are affecting us and how the recent understanding of science changes, while also trying to ground myself with nature and doing things artistic and expressive like dancing or painting and things like
Mhm.
that. So,
Sounds like a rich life. Now, I'll be honest, I mean, I resonate with the time in nature, with the travel, like those are sort of non-negotiables. Like I gotta do them. But being in nature doesn't necessarily pay the electric bill, the gas bill. So
yeah.
how do you how do you, what is your livelihood like? How do you make your money?
Yeah, I split my livelihood between a couple of different things. So I teach as a professor at Saybrook University. I've been teaching there for a couple of years now, and I really enjoy their approach to psychology. It's a humanistic approach, so it's really about understanding the person, which, as I'm sure you can see now, that that's something that's very important to me, of
Mm-hmm.
not putting people in boxes, but really trying to explore what it is that maybe they use to keep themselves in a box. So I do some one-on-one coaching for stress management. I work with a variety of people. It really depends on what they're dealing with, and just provide them lifestyle habit changes. So things that maybe they don't understand are influencing how they
Mm-hmm.
think, feel, and behave. So, for example, if your commute to work is an hour and a half, where, I lived in the DC area for a while, and many people I knew were commuting an hour and a half to get to work. At some point, that's going to affect your
Mm-hmm.
livelihood,
Yeah.
and you have to decide if that commute is worth the money that you're making versus having an extra, what, 3 hours a day, and
Wow. Yeah.
and however many hours a week, right? So helping people understand all these different aspects of their life, how their financial stress may play into how they're feeling right now, or uncertainty of the future. So working one-on-one and doing those kind of things. And then I work with organizations. And for that, I do a lot of different consulting as well. I am on the board of a nonprofit that specializes in mental health and collegiate sports. So getting collegiate athletes tools, especially with everything that's going on in the sports world right now with
Hmm.
the NIL just really just upending traditional sports as we knew it, or collegiate sports as we knew it. And then working with other organizations, like I work with the Veterans Administration, designing a transitionary program for veterans that are coming out of the military and find themselves at a hospital, whether it's because they were medically discharged from the military or maybe they have a high disability rating. They get referrals to the VA and they'll go through my program to help them reintegrate back into society. Because one thing that the military and the Veterans Administration have not done very well thus far is really helping veterans integrate back into society. And we see that with the disruptions to a lot of veterans' lives, with a huge amount of veterans being homeless, or food insecure,
Hmm.
struggling to find work, all those different things that really should not be happening. And it comes down to that transition process and really helping them integrate back and understanding what they can do and how they can do it. So those are just a couple of the things
Wow.
that I'm involved in. But
I
I
know.
have a lot of irons in the fire.
I know you do, and that's part of what sort of why I gravitated towards your aura, your vibe, your brand. I know that that word can induce some cringing for some people, but it's really just a vibe or an aura, and it happened to be on LinkedIn. That's kind of my playground these days. So with all these different coals and different fires and other things that you do, I mean, each of those things individually, those three sort of main buckets that you've shared with me, sound really rewarding on their own. But if I asked you to kind of take a big picture, look back at everything you've done academically, professionally, extracurricularly, what's kind of the thing that you're most proud of so far in your career?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And, I think there's a couple of different ways I could answer it depending on what I focus on with my career. But I think probably the biggest thing that influenced the trajectory of my life as it is today. I was going through a breakup when I got out of the military. So this is around 2009. And and the individual I was with was actually a very tumultuous relationship,
Mm.
to the point where it was physically violent on the other person's part. And at the time, I didn't know. I was 20. Well, I was 21 when we got married,
Wow.
and this was around like 22, 23, and it became so abusive that I started running from this person, from this woman.
Mm.
uh, and as you know, a 23-year-old that exercised all the time. I mean, I was much bigger in my early 20s. I played football. I
Wow.
lifted weights every day. So I was like 210 pounds running from this 150-pound woman that
Wow.
would chuck plates at my head and all kinds of stuff like that. So it, getting out of the military is like a two-part problem, because now I'm trying to reintegrate back into society, also trying to reintegrate back into society from a marriage that really siloed me. And
Mm.
I've only come to know this recently, actually, that some of my friends from the military were like, yeah, we like just couldn't be around her, so we didn't invite you to do stuff.
Wow.
And but all this to say, it took me to a place of pretty extreme desperation, where I was trying to figure out who I was and where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do, and I had no idea what to do. So I ended up selling everything that I owned, and I took that money and I just spent it backpacking Europe for 6 months. And the most life-changing thing that I've ever done. And so I did that. I traveled to pretty much every country that you can access by the Euro,
Wow.
which is most countries in the EU. And and just spent that time really trying to understand myself and understand what I wanted and understand what was interesting to me. And it led to an event that I now know is called a mystical experience. But it's essentially
Mm,
this experience that's ineffable. So it's very difficult to describe in words. It usually involves, something much bigger than yourself, God, the universe, something where you just feel that I don't know, everything just kind of aligned for me. And it was like everything that you've gone through is for a purpose. And so you can sit here and because at the time I was frustrated. I'd missed a train after a long day of traveling. And I was frustrated. And it was just like everything had happened for a reason. For you to be here, to have this experience, and to have these thoughts. And it was such a eye-opening thing to have as a at that time I was 25 or 26 that it really changed everything in my life. And from that point on I started to wonder about traveling and how traveling affected people. And that led me to a master's program, and then to a
mm.
PhD program, and then to studying stress, and here we are today.
Oh man, so many follow-up questions, so many, but I have to be selective. I mean, I'll just start with the last thing that you said. I mean, I'm not coining anything here today, but in my brain, I haven't heard it or I haven't been aware of it. Travel therapy or travel as therapy, right?
Hmm.
Knowing what I know now, if I could, I could have totally done that as a major. Right? I would have, kind of created my own major in school and just studied travel as therapy because to me, it has been incredibly liberating, sort of what's the word? Life changing to be sure, super fun, eye opening, challenging in so many ways. I think I said liberating, very freeing, creativity inducing, all of that. So yeah, so that's the thought I had. Is that a concept or an idea that you've come across in other areas as sort of travel therapy or travel as therapy?
Yeah, actually. And I think there's a lot of overlap, and it really comes down to that mystical experience part.
Mm,
But essentially, kind of how I feel mystical experiences work are these are experiences that we have when we're doing things outside of our normal routine, like pretty severely outside of our normal routine.
mm,
Right. So like selling everything you own and just traveling for 6 months is not something I could probably do again at this
right,
point. But
right.
at that point I could. And so all the experiences I was having were completely unique. And I hadn't really heard stories at the time. And so I think it allowed for that kind of exploration of myself that got me to that point. And so I think traveling is something that really opens your mind. Uh, because there are so many people that you can interact with, so many different aspects of culture that you can be a part of,
Mm,
and the different foods you can try, the I mean, so many different things from the clothing, the weather, the sights, all those kind of things can really just draw so much emotion out of you that I think that's the kind of tug that causes these experiences. But in my dissertation study, I actually elected to not use travel because traveling, well, one, it's something very difficult to test.
mhm,
You'd literally have to pay for somebody to travel in
mhm,
that
mhm.
in that study,
Yeah.
and I wasn't about to pay for like 20 college students to travel to
Oh
Europe
yeah, right.
on my money as a as a
Yep.
PhD student. It wasn't going to happen. So I found another way to kind of get people to travel in their mind. And
Mm,
so I used sensory deprivation tanks, or flotation tanks as they're more commonly known, I think, to elicit those same experiences. And it was interesting because when somebody had a mystical experience, they had a 41% reduction in perceived stress. So
mm,
not physical stress. There was actually no change
mm.
physically to their body, because I did monitor that as well through heart
Wow.
rate variability. And so it was really interesting that their perception of what they were going through was not as stressful if they had this experience. And so it kind of confirmed what I had already kind of thought of these experiences being kind of schema altering. So they change our worldview, they change how we perceive things, which allows us to change our thought patterns. So But I'd be curious to hear, because you're well traveled too. So, did you ever have a kind of mystical experience where you're like, whoa, what just happened? This is mind blowing.
I think every time I've been to 35 countries, maybe 36, I have to really like triple check the math there, but I think every time I travel, when I sort of, especially if it's international, especially if it involves a plane and leaving sort of the thing that, you know, kind of literally grounds
Mm,
my feet, I am now in the air. I have no, and I always get the window seat. Because I know how to I know how to manage my hydration, especially for the shorter flights, where I can just stare at the window or nap or watch a good documentary or movie. But most of the time, I'm just staring at this cosmos, at this tiny little world. So that
mm,
already sets me up for a completely different lens, schema, mindset, um, attitude change when I just see myself literally leaving the earth for those hours or minutes. Um, I likewise in college, I did a trip in Europe for maybe like I did study abroad in Spain, so that was my
mm,
hub, and I traveled all around. Then in the summer, I continued traveling. I went back to Poland several times, my home base, or I should say my original home base, because now it's more New York. And just being able to just with such ease, right? More than in my home, my life back home, but with such ease, be able to just connect with people and literally or figuratively break bread in places that, I mean, yes, they have travelers, but not as many as other countries. So, for example, Albania and Macedonia,
mm.
amazing experiences with people. And, I guess for some people, those countries would be maybe considered off the beaten path, but I think that just makes them more attractive to me because I'd rather spend more time with locals or people who aren't also travelers like me, right? I don't
Yeah.
necessarily need to be reminded that I'm a traveler. I'm well aware of that, but just to be able to taste of the local culture and the food and the mindsets, right, of people who are from there and are living there and have a different perspective, whether it's on American politics or about food or music. It doesn't really matter what we're talking about. Just that experience of breaking bread with people just makes me completely forget that I have a life back home.
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. That's one of my absolute favorite things is getting away from, you know, the touristy areas
Hmm.
and finding locals to commune with.
Yeah.
I was in Croatia and I stayed with an elderly couple that they were just at the train station, like when I got off the train station in Dubrovnik,
Yep.
and they were just standing there trying to get somebody to stay with them because they
Yes.
needed to earn money.
Sure. Sure.
And I just remember, I can't remember the whole story now, but they were going through some health issues. I remember that, and the man was struggling walking and stuff like that. So
Mm.
his wife was going around. She was the one actually that found me at the train station. Was like, "Hey, come stay." And they spoke very little English,
Yeah.
um, but it was a beautiful experience, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. Uh,
Yeah.
so on that note, though, because you had mentioned flying and kind of getting this really good overview of the world, and I was just curious if you'd heard of the overview effect that astronauts experience when they go into space.
I'm not so I can only imagine. I don't want to assume, but what I've have heard in terms of their accounts is just this overwhelming feeling of connectedness and love and compassion for all of humanity because you can kind of see it encapsulated in this little, bluish, blue green marble. But
Yeah.
you tell me, I don't know if that's it or if there's some other component that I'm missing.
No, no. I mean, that's pretty much it. It's getting so far away from this world that you see that you're just this tiny, tiny thing in the
Yeah.
grand scheme of all that's going on. And not only are you looking at this Earth, but you're sitting out in the middle of space where there's literally billions of stars and planets and likely trillions.
Yeah.
And it gives you that sense, again, kind of like that mystical experience where it's so much bigger than you that the worries that we seem to, fret about or focus
Yeah.
on kind of just don't seem so important anymore. And I think that's a significant experience because you have that, then maybe you start focusing more on what is really important to you,
Mm.
building relationships, traveling, spending time with, your kids or your partner, and things like that. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So let me ask you then, because I want to kind of clarify. I actually went to a sensory deprivation tank one time in New York City, and it was cool. But for me, like when I'm traveling, I'm actually overwhelmed in a good way though, not like panic attack, but more like, oh my God, this is amazing, like cuteness or deliciousness overload or information overload when I'm traveling, and I happen to be that doesn't drain me, it excites me. Um, but how does that, so tell us what a sensory deprivation tank is or might look like, and how does that work, right? Because that is, my understanding is that that's like the opposite of having a crazy, like external, full of stimulation adventure. So just give us some details about that. What do you know about sensory deprivation tanks?
Yeah, that's a great question because it is kind of a different effect. You're not being stimulated with a lot of new information, and really you're creating that information yourself.
Mm,
So my from what I've read in the literature and the research that I've done and just my use of it, because now I floated while I was doing that study, I became really good friends with the the shop owner,
mm,
and so they kind of let me float because I had paid for everybody in my study, and so they
right.
had just let me kind of float whenever I was there, and so from those experiences, kind of what I believe is happening is that when we go into a sensory deprivation tank, all of your senses are deprived for the most part. So you wear earplugs, so you can't
Mm,
hear anything. You are in this kind of enclosed contraption. You kind of think of it as like a long bathtub, a bathtub that you can lay down completely flat, and there's kind of a little bit of side on or a little bit of space on both sides of you, but not a lot, maybe 6 inches to a foot on both
okay,
sides, and then probably, depending on how tall you are, a foot or two on front and back.
gotcha.
But so when they fill this tank or this bathtub, they fill it with salinated water. So the water is heavily salted and it causes you to be very buoyant. So you're floating on the top of this water, and they make the water roughly skin temperature.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does is over about, for me, it took about 5 to 15 minutes, depending. But your body goes, hey, pay attention to this water, pay attention to this water, pay attention to this water. And then you kind of become one with the water because after your body is overstimulated to such an extent and there's no danger, nothing's happening, it kind of just turns those senses off. And so after like 10 or 15 minutes, you don't even feel your body. So now you can't see, now you can't hear, now you can't really feel anything. And you are and there's nothing kind of going on, but your brain is constantly trying to figure out what is going on. That's your
Mm,
brain's only job, is to really figure out like what is going on and how to categorize things or interact with this world. And so what it starts to do is it starts to produce its own stimulus because it's experiencing nothing,
mhm.
right? So suddenly you start to feel weightless and you're like, why do I feel like I'm floating? And for me, it always feels like I'm floating in a river under the stars. Like I start to see visuals, like flashes of color or light. I start to get the sensation that I'm moving, and it kind of turns into. Uh, it reminds me of that scene in like Willy Wonka when they're going through the tunnel without the creepy singing, um, and the lights
Right.
start going off and
Yes.
flashing color everywhere. It kind of reminds me of that experience. And
Mm,
so when we deprive all of our senses, our brain actually starts creating its own stimulus, and that produces a completely different experience depending on your mental state, what you went into the tank thinking about, all those kind of things. But you can have a mystical experience because that lack of stimulus allows you to go much deeper into yourself, into your body, if you can be present with it. And I don't know. People have some pretty interesting experiences in the flotation tank. So I hope that
that's
was
awesome. Oh, that's awesome.
kind
It
of
brought me
clear in
back.
how that works.
It brought me back to that one. I only had the one experience. You clearly have much more experience there. Um, I feel like this is the part of the podcast where I say, hey, listeners, you can get a 20% promo code with blah, blah, blah at your local, at your local deprivation tank center. But who knows, one day. But so is that kind of what are your thoughts on that? Because I've also heard of like dopamine fasting, dopamine diet. Would that be part of that? Is that along the similar sort of dimension and wavelength? What are your thoughts on that?
Wait, can you ask the question again? I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
So I think like maybe it's the tech bros in Silicon Valley or just what I've heard through the ether. People will dopamine fast, right? Will just deprive
Mm.
themselves of
Oh,
things
okay, I see.
like their dopamine, whether it's sugar, whether it's Instagram, whether it's gambling, just deprive of themselves of things that normally get them excited or
Mm.
get them hooked. So I wonder if that's like the extreme form, right? Because you're in a tank and you're doing nothing. You're not gaming, you're not drinking, you're not having sex. You're literally just one with
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great kind of analogy to put with it. So yeah, it is something like that. It's again, it comes back to the experience that you just haven't had.
Yeah.
And your brain's job is to produce information. Like everything that we see is really just a simulation created by your brain. We have no idea what we actually see. You
Hmm.
know, what these materials actually look like, what the world actually looks like. It's just our brain's interpretation.
Mm.
And so if you deprive it of that and deprive it, of dopamine, for instance, then you would most likely get that rebound effect where
Mm.
you feel, you know, you're deprived of that kind of joy or elation feeling,
Mm.
and then all of a sudden you have it, and it would be much bigger.
Yeah.
Uh, and I could see that becoming addictive, very similar to somebody like adrenaline junkies, right?
Hmm.
Because these are people that have done the same thing with their bodies, only instead of dopamine, they focus on the hormone adrenaline,
Mm.
right? And so adrenaline is the feeling that they kind of chase. It's that, that heart pounding excitement. And, that can be very exciting. And I'm a rock climber too. So,
Mm.
one of the things in rock climbing that people do that are kind of adrenaline junkies is free soloing, which is climbing up, 1,000-foot rock face with no equipment at all, just your body. If you slip, that's it.
Oh boy.
And that's a very extreme example, but I think we're starting to understand that you can be addicted to a lot of things in life, including that sensation that we create in our own body. And it also creates the kind of scenarios in our relationships with our friends, family, coworkers, colleagues. When people stay in a bad relationship, it's probably related to an effect very similar to this.
Mm.
It's a feeling of comfort or normalcy that they get because of the hormones being elicited are similar to the hormones that were elicited at a different point in their life, like maybe in childhood if they were in, if their parents were abusive. And so it's this kind of understanding of what you're in. And the problem with those kind of situations is they're afraid to get out of that because the known is less scary than the unknown.
Mm.
And that also, I think, comes from individuals, unfortunately, that aren't able to travel and see enough or gain enough insight or knowledge of themselves and the world, uh, which is unfortunate. So,
Hmm.
but yeah,
Yeah. What are your thoughts on, so, obviously travel. I mean, I've traveled a lot on the cheap, so on a shoestring budget in the past. So I know it's doable, but it is still an expense. It's still time away from work. So there are certain people who at this point may not be able to travel sort of internationally or in the grand scale or scheme, but and also sensory deprivation tanks, there's a cost incurred there as well,
yeah, oh,
although
yeah.
it's way cheaper than going to Paris for the weekend. So um, what are your thoughts? Do you have any suggestions for ways that people can kind of induce similar or try to, I guess, create a situation that is conducive to a mystical experience? Because I don't think you can force it, but you can kind of maybe create those
Yeah.
environments in a way that doesn't necessarily require a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And that's really been what I've been trying to figure
Yeah.
out since I had this realization about these experiences. And I would say it comes down to a couple of different factors. One, I think you have to be in a place in your life where you're open to new
Mm,
things.
mm,
Because the minute you start shutting down like thoughts like that, like if you had a thought that was like, wow, this feels like nothing I've ever had before, it's almost as if like I'm connecting with the universe. But if you're a person that's like, no, that's stupid. You can't connect with the universe, right? You can shut that down. And then where does your brain go? Probably not continuing in that direction. So I think you really have to be open to having an experience that maybe you didn't even plan to have, and it may not be what you want, but it may be what you need,
mm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so that's one aspect of it. And then the other thing I think really comes back to doing something that you have not done. Produce new neurons because
Hmm.
essentially what I think we really want to have happen is for the brain to start going, wait, what is this? What are we doing? What's going on? How is this happening? And start asking questions. And the more questions it kind of asks, the more opportunities there are for it to land on something like, wow, this is like nothing I've ever experienced before. And so the things that get you as far outside of your norm
Yeah.
as can be, like traveling, but it can even be doing something as simple as, let's say you play, I love sound baths, so like singing
Mm,
bowls, things like that.
yeah.
Let's say you just sit in your closet in the dark, you put in headphones, or maybe, if you have a big enough space, you lay down in the closet on a comfortable pillow and you close your eyes and you listen to these sounds and just start to feel your body, feel the sounds in your body and see where that kind of takes you. And that will give you a very similar
Mm,
experience to a sensory deprivation tank experience, in a slightly different way, because obviously you're producing stimulus with the sound,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
it can also be freeing. So,
That's awesome.
yeah.
Again, I've only had that experience once where I've done the sound bath experience in a communal setting. I had the best nap of my life. Okay. And then I woke up into like gradually into it. So the session hadn't ended. And I gradually woke up to those sounds again. And it was just like, oh, all is right with the world. It was a wonderful experience. And it was like a massage for my innards, TMI, but
Yeah.
it was just like every organ, every piece of, my body was being massaged from within, with sound. It was awesome.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. And it reminds me of, there's a state of, well, state of being. It's somnambulism. They used to use the term for mesmerists. So
Okay.
way back, Mesmer's time when he was doing his animal magnetism is what he called it. We now know it as hypnosis, but they use the term somnambulism, which is the state where somebody appeared to be asleep
Mm,
but they weren't actually asleep. They were just in such a deep state of comfort that, yeah, that they appeared asleep and they felt asleep and they woke, or not woke, but they came back to consciousness feeling a
hmm.
lot more energized. Uh, but yeah, I mean, sound baths are amazing, and recently. I found this other instrument that has just been blowing my mind. It's called a hand pan. Have you experienced anything with the hand pan?
I've heard the phrase and I might have seen something on YouTube way back when, but please educate me.
Oh, I don't know I don't know if I can educate anybody on it. But I mean, I'm talking I stumbled on this maybe 2, 3 weeks ago,
Okay.
but I mean, it's become so influential in my life that I actually purchased a hand pan recently. I like to do different kinds of music, and so and kind of adding it to my music collection for things that my kids can explore with, because I feel like music is very integral. But
Yeah.
essentially, it's this metal pan, and there's kind of these little divots on the pan, so they're like little indentations, and you tap these indentations and they produce this very resonant sound. So it's obviously vibrating metal, so you get that vibrating metal sound, but it has a very bright, distinct tone that
Mm.
is incredibly calming and peaceful. I don't know, I don't know if there's a better way to describe it than
Well,
that,
our
but
listeners
it's
can just
really
Google it and
beautiful.
listen, right? They
Yeah,
can
yeah.
just Google
I
it
mean,
and Absolutely. So when you were talking about somnambulism, I wrote, I don't know why, I mean, I studied psych in college, but I wrote a paper on it. And there were people who would, drive to the store and have no recollection of it, just do
Mm,
all
yeah.
sorts of things. And I'm sort of chuckling because this week, tax day, I wonder if anyone did their taxes while asleep, right? That would be a first. So, I mean, going back to what you were talking about being open, right? Sort of the opposite is being constrained or being closed off or being stuck, right? Stuck in a rut.
Yeah.
So, and you kind of talked about your challenges with that initial relationship, where you felt siloed or you felt kind of stuck in that moment. So I want to kind of pick your brain a little bit about, how do people get stuck, or maybe not even physically, but like their thoughts can sometimes get just stuck in a rut or in a cycle. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's something that I think needs to be talked about more because we have, or we think we have this understanding of how our brain works, and it doesn't always work the way we think it does. And so I think one of the most significant principles I learned when I was studying psychophysiology is that your brain, for the most part, only works in one direction. So if you think of your neurons firing, they fire in one direction. And
Mm,
so they create these kind of loops or
mm,
networks in your brain. And basically, all these different memories, thoughts, experiences, stimulus are tied together with other things. And it comes down to a different theory called Hebbian theory, which is, in very simple terms, neurons that fire together wire together. So
mm,
essentially, things that you experience simultaneously have a connected path to some extent. And so the more paths you create to a single neuron, that memory, that stimulus, that thing, the easier it is for your brain to go there, right? Because you have more connections. And you can kind of think of it like a highway.
mm,
So I live in Houston. We have, 5 to 7 lane highways, depending on where you're at. That's because there's a lot of traffic going into the city, right? Coming out of the city, sometimes you won't have as many highways, or the lanes will kind of taper down to like 2 or 3 lanes because now you don't have as much exit traffic to worry about, right? It's people commuting coming into the city, maybe leaving the city, it's a little different, but your brain works very similarly. So the memories and thoughts that you have the most are going to have the most connections. So it's going to be easiest to get there. Your brain is going to be really fast at getting there. And it creates this network. So remember, things that wire together, or things that fire together wire together.
mm.
So negative thought patterns, or negative thoughts in general about yourself, about the world, tie together in some form or fashion. So you could think of it this way. If you're a kid and somebody stole your lollipop and stuck it in your hair and it got stuck, right? Let's say you're like 10 years old. So you remember this pretty well. You remember the humiliation, all of those things. As an adult, you may have an aversion to lollipops
Mm,
because even just having a lollipop in your hand reminds
mm,
you
mm.
of that event, and you don't like to be reminded of that event,
Right.
right? So this is kind of how your brain works. But when you have thoughts of, like, let's say I'm ugly, right? You have that thought. Well, what is that tied to? What is ugliness tied to? Well, ugliness could be tied to the clothes that you have, how much money you make,
Mm,
the partner you're with. Maybe they reinforce that feeling or belief,
no, no.
or even just trigger you to feel that way through something they say that maybe they don't even know. Like, you know, uh, maybe asking your partner to brush their teeth or something like that can be
Mm,
perceived as, oh, he thinks I'm gross or ugly,
yeah.
right? So it's understanding that these are all connected in some way. So if you can get out of those thought patterns, which takes effort, because mental health takes effort. You're not going to get better just taking a pill. Some people can get to
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
positive thought patterns, but for the most part, you have to get out of that. So you have to force yourself to think positive thoughts over and over and over again till your brain starts to build those same connections
Mm,
to those positive pathways, where it's easier to go to the positive than it is to go to the negative. And so it's this battle that is going to be constant throughout our lives. And so that's one way we kind of get stuck, is that we focus on the negative, or we have a significant life event, like let's say COVID happens. Now you're stuck at home. You're not doing a lot of the things you used to do. Now maybe you're feeling a little depressed because you're not out being with your friends or spending time doing the things that you like to do. And that can get you into these thought patterns that start to ruminate, where they go over and over and over. Man, I wish I could do something. It's so boring being here at home. I have nobody here. I have nothing to do. It's scary, and you can get stuck into those cycles to the point where it gets more and more difficult to get out without the aid of drugs or some significant event like traveling to pull you outside of those normal thought patterns so that you can have new thoughts.
Wow. I mean, and also people like you, Dr. J. I love that, just that phrase. But and coaching, as a coach, I see this in my own work, in the work of many of my peers, is we can bring people out of that rut because we ask really thoughtful, deep, intentional questions that break people out of that rut. And, sometimes I'll open a session with, what's the best part of your week been? Or what's the best part of your day been? And completely innocuous question. And some people struggle with that. And that allows me to understand their schemas and their lives and their priorities and their values, all in that simple single question. And it's a great, it's not just an icebreaker. I mean, we go deep, right?
Hmm.
So it's like we're scuba diving. We're taking we're taking the, what is it, is it the red pill in the Matrix, and we're going deep.
Yeah, yeah, the red pill.
So there's that. Now, goodness, again, so many questions. But so tell me a little bit about the work that you do, whether it's with the veterans or just in your private practice as a coach. What are some, ways in which you're effective in getting people unstuck and out of their rut?
Yeah. So again, it comes back to that principle of neurons that fire together, wire
Mm,
together. So knowing that, it's getting people, one, outside of those normal thought patterns, and then two, introducing new thought patterns or new stimulus that cause new thought patterns. And then three, it's doing things that are going to uplift you and create a lifestyle that supports those goals. So how I can work with different veterans, for example, one of the things, if you talk to any veteran, reintegration is the hardest part.
mm,
Reintegrating back into the civilian world, because the biggest part is that it's so different from the military world. In the military, you're told what to do, you're told what to wear, you're told where to be, you're
mm.
told, so many things
Wow.
that kind of free up brain space to do other things. You don't have to worry about what you're going to wear tomorrow. You don't have to worry about, a lot of things that people worry about in the civilian world. And on top of that, you have a lot of support structures, right? In the military, you have free healthcare. You have 30 days of paid time off per year that can accrue to 60 days and maybe even more nowadays. I don't
Mm,
know
mm,
the rules anymore. Um, and you can, you just have a lot of access. You can actually jump on military aircraft and fly for free.
mm.
So when I was a kid, being my family was 7 people,
Wow.
it was very difficult for us to travel because flights are expensive. And so we would do that. It's called hopping. And so we take military hops all over the world
Mm,
to get some travel in. And so helping people, like in the veteran community, is really getting them to see what they lost from, one, going from being a civilian to the military, right? So they have to understand that you gave something up to be in the military. You gave up bits of yourself, your
mm,
identity. You wear a uniform every day, which may become your identity, right? There are plenty of people that have
mm.
that military identity, right?
Right,
So
right.
they can wear that and wear it in a very different way. But you lose your ability to dress how you want, or even have a beard styled the way that you want, or wear piercings and tattoos. And there's a bunch of different rules around that. So you have to understand that you lost the ability to individualize yourself, and you became,
Yeah.
kind of one. And then the exit part, which is, okay, now I am a military, kind of identified person going back into civilian life. But what does that look like? What's that transition? What do I lose from being in the military? Like the support systems, like having to now think about what you're going to wear and how people may perceive what you wear, or how you dress, or even having facial piercings like I have, right? To, okay, what can I gain in the civilian world? What is there to be gained? Where's my new identity? And so this concept is what I focus on a lot, is identity, because I think
Mhm.
for so many people, when especially when they struggle with mental health, if you actually ask them, like, if they don't feel that they're going to achieve their goal, or if they feel that, I'm 40, I should have been able to do this and I didn't, or I look at other people and they achieve this and I didn't. If you ask them, what is it that you actually are trying to achieve? What is that thing that you're chasing? They often haven't defined it.
Mm.
They're like, oh, I want success. Well, what is success to you?
Yeah.
Because, success for me is just living a happy, healthy life where I can, influence people's lives in a positive manner. But success for you may be different. How would you define success for yourself?
Yeah. So are you asking me that, or that's a rhetorical question you ask, well, an
No,
actual
no,
question you ask them?
I'm really curious. Like, how would you define success for you?
Yeah, so just being good with my own body, period, right? And because for me, when I'm good in my own body, and which includes my brain, my heart, all the organs, I am almost automatically better to everyone around me, whether that's family, friends, clients, people on the street, strangers at the post office
Mm,
queue at the line. So being good with me equals being good with the world. And I think I've experienced that success. Well, first of all, I think it requires daily vigilance and practice, right? Just like
hmm.
eating well or exercise, you can have off days, but if in the overwhelming majority, if 80, 90% of your life you're doing the good things, you'll be good. So you don't always have to achieve or be in success every moment of your life, but to kind of be in that state most of the time. And I feel that I am. I know that that might, for some people, that might not seem like an ambitious goal, but for me and my journey, it was. So to be in it, to be in success, and to not just like, but love the person that I am, that's massive. That's massive. I have other goals, like I have concrete goals, like if I'm lucky to live to 100, I want to hit up 100 countries. I'm at
Mm.
30, 35, 36. So long way to go. And then other goals around my business, around my health, around, social life, family life, all those other things that I'm sort of working on. But the big core thing that have been able to achieve is just loving the person in the mirror.
Yeah, I love that. No, I think that's a really great example of what we're talking about, because you have defined success for yourself in a way that, to my understanding, seems like you can't fail,
Mm,
right? It's the pursuit of yourself, which is almost in everything that you do. It's
yeah.
really difficult to fail at that, because even in failing at something,
Yeah.
you gain some knowledge for yourself, or
If you're
some
open
something,
to that knowledge, right?
if
If you're
if you're
open,
open
right?
to it. Yeah, you seem like a person that's open.
I am, and I think part of it is like I think I had that sort of unfair advantage, that superpower that I just am wired that way. That's how my neurons fire, right? So I
Yeah.
just tend to, being I guess a neophiliac, where I love new experiences and new things. I'm also a creature of habit in other ways, so it's not mutually exclusive. It's not sort of a binary, but I do love new experiences when it comes to travel, food, people, projects. So that's probably why I couldn't work for somebody 9 to 5 doing very similar things every day, why I went the sort of the solopreneur, freelance consultant coach route, because every day is somewhat different, and
Mhm.
I can kind of determine how much I work and how I work. So um back to the sort of the concept of the wiring. It just reminded me, I think it was James Clear, so another gentleman with a similar hairstyle. I think he's the one who talks about habit stacking, where you just kind of do things and create systems and steps and processes together that work in confluence, that sort of conspire to get you towards that goal. So whether it's nutrition or sleep, like doing all the things and tying them together. So if you do one thing, if you're saying you're going to go run tomorrow, do that first jog, then you also tell a friend, so there's accountability and there's that social aspect. And maybe you take out the your all of your clothes and get them ready the night before, so you're basically making it easy for it to happen, right? Because there's so many other excuses and reasons why it may not, why the morning jog may not happen. So I may be butchering it. It may not even be attributed to James Clear, but I just came back from a coaching conference, and he was talking about other aspects of that, and so it might have been jumbled in my head. But that's okay because my brain is beautifully sort of creative and it likes to just connect dots where there might not be dots to be connected. So that's just a flavor of what it is to inhabit my own brain. I wanted to ask one other question about, your work with veterans, just the concept and the reality, the harsh reality of post-traumatic stress disorder, of PTSD. Um, do you have any experience with that? Do you work with clients who suffer from that, and what's been your experience or your insight?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I do a lot of work with people that have PTSD or at least have gone through significant trauma. I
Mm,
do not treat their trauma in any
yeah.
way, but I help them understand how their thought patterns may be contributing to that. So,
Mm,
very similar to what we're already talking about, neurons that fire together, wire together, is when you go through trauma, all of that is wired in some way, right? So one of the people that I've worked with was trafficked for over 15 years, right? And
wow.
so there are a lot of thought patterns that developed during that time that can be triggers that will kind of take her back. But if you can kind of help somebody see that they can change those, because what happens is people feel like they can't change, especially now where in most circles mental health is talked about primarily, biophysically. So
Mm,
you're or biopsychologically. So you're talking about we're talking about neurons, we're talking about chemicals, we're talking about, you know, hormones in the body and things
yeah.
that are changing that the average person, what are you going to do about neurons?
Right, right,
Do
right,
you know
right,
how
right.
neurons work?
Yeah,
What are you going to do about your hormones? Most people
yeah.
can't get there because it's so complex. So it's really simplifying these concepts in a way that makes sense to people. So breaking down, you know, that your trauma can cause you to re-traumatize yourself over and over and over
Wow.
if you, coming back to the identity piece, if you identify as the victim. This happened to me, there's nothing I can do, my life is ruined. I'm always going to be stuck like this, there's nothing I can do to change how I feel, right? Those kind of thoughts can start to ruminate and drive this sense of identity to the point where you identify so much with your trauma that it's difficult to even get away from it to establish your own identity, right? So what I do is try to help them reestablish the identity that they want and kind of reframe what has been taken from them. So, for example, we talked about the lollipop earlier in the kid's
Hmm.
hair. Coming back to that, if, you know, reframing that experience of saying, hey, this lollipop may have been a bad thing in the past, but it can be a good thing now. That happened, what, 20 years ago? Let's talk about how we can change what this lollipop is for you.
Mm.
And
Good. Yeah.
suddenly they can start shifting those perspectives. If we do certain exercises, a lot of this has to do with being mindful and simply understanding that your brain is only going to go to what it knows. So
Yeah.
if you show it something that it already has a history with, it's going to produce those memories, stimulus,
Wow.
thought patterns. um, so yeah, and then when it comes to like military veterans, it's the same thing. It's the identity. They identify so much with what happened on that battlefield. I'm a killer. I killed somebody, and there's nothing I can do to bring that person back to life, and therefore I'm a
Wow.
bad person. I will always be a bad person. I did horrible things, and I should really just die,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
It kind of gets you to that place. And so it's helping people understand that that one event is not who they are. It doesn't have to be who they are.
Yeah.
It may be in their head who they are, but it doesn't have to be. And so creating the lifestyle, as you were saying, creating habits around you that support that, whether it's a note on your bathroom mirror that says, that happened when you were a kid, or you were in an untenable situation where people were firing at you,
Yeah.
or a young girl was wearing a bomb vest. Those are situations that are
Mm.
untenable.
Yeah.
Nobody should ever be put in
Yeah.
those kind of
Yeah.
situations. And so to judge yourself and to tell yourself that you can't do anything good because of that gets you to the place where you really can't. And so helping
Wow.
them get
Yeah.
to a place where they can start saying, I can do good. I want to do good. I want to shift this identity piece can get people out of those ruts and really start to establish who they are, or more specifically, who they want to be. Because we're all kind of in pursuit of who we want to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I often say like I like to work with clients and quite literally let them get out of their own damn way so that they can
Yeah.
become the better or the best version of themselves. One other thought I had is with regard to the lollipop, right? So, ideally it could be a good thing or at the very least a neutral thing that doesn't re-traumatize you every time, right?
Yeah.
I think the challenge now is that with media and social media specifically is I can open my phone and I can get 17 bits of horrible global news within a minute. And those are like death by paper cuts. Like those are micro traumas on my heart. And I'm a
Oh,
very
yeah.
empathic human being. So even if I'm not out in the field or, in the war zone, I can see that and I can say, my goodness, I feel for these people on this side or on that side, on both sides, it doesn't matter, but I feel for the humans behind the scenes. And I can see that in my phone. It's just all of these micro traumas that are just being layered upon layer upon layer, and so that's why I mean that's part of why there's so much suffering. But
Yeah.
as I want to be mindful of your time, and I could literally talk to you for another 2 hours and not run out of questions because I have so many to say, but I wanted to make one observation and then end with a question. So
Okay.
one of the many things that drew me to your work is even just the not even the content, like the little video vignettes. There's so much creativity and literally color and vibrancy and design, like the clothes that you wear in your videos, and it's just there's a levity and an excitement and a creativity that just oozes, right? As
Hmm.
opposed to being like one of those very dry and corporate coaches, which certainly attracts a certain audience,
Yeah.
but just the way that you're able to communicate with that visual language without saying a word, that's really powerful and resonated deeply with me. So,
Thank you.
so
Yeah.
appreciate you there. My question to you is this: how can people, get in touch or learn more about your work?
Yeah. Well, thank you first of all for having me on. This has been really enjoyable, and I could also participate in another 2 hours, and
Yeah,
would like to ask more questions to you. So
maybe next time. Maybe next
yeah,
time. Yep.
maybe next time. Yeah, so you can get in contact with me on my website. So that's going to be www.drjei.com. And that's drjei.com. Or you can find me on Instagram. Pretty much all the social media. It's
Mm-hmm.
at dr.jei.p. So,
Awesome.
yep, you can find me on pretty much all the social media platforms. I try to post content regularly. I'm getting better at it, but hopefully soon it'll be consistently weekly drops that
That's
hopefully will
awesome.
give people similar insight.
I just met you recently within the last couple of months, and I'm really loving the kind of the quality and the flavor of the insights that you share with the world, and I'm grateful for you. So thanks again for showing up today.
Oh, thank you, David. It's been
Be
wonderful.
well. Take
Take care.
care.